She parked the car in front of the cemetery, just like she did every month. Same day, same time, same path to the cold gravestone. Claire Thompson, a woman who seemed to have it all: prestige, power, a flawless house overlooking the Savannah River. But inside, just emptiness. Since Ethan passed, life had become a series of silent appointments and swallowed tears. No one dared to talk about what happened, and she preferred it that way. She avoided questions, avoided answers. The pain was her secret, and the grave, her penance. But that morning something felt different. As soon as she got out of the car, Claire sensed it, as if the air around her was lighter or heavier. Hard to explain. As she approached her son's grave, she froze. Someone had been there, not long ago. On top of the white, spotless headstone were fresh flowers, a colorful, childlike drawing, and a small teddy bear. She stopped. Her heart raced. The flowers weren't hers. The drawing, with shaky, colorful lines, showed a figure holding hands with a taller man. "Me and Daddy in heaven," scribbled in crooked letters. The teddy bear, worn but clean, looked like it had been loved by small hands. Claire slowly crouched down, touching the toy as if it were sacred. Who could have done this? And why? For a moment, anger tried to rise. Who dares to invade someone else's grief? But before the irritation could grow, something stronger hit her. A chill, a hunch, a sensation so deep and strange it tightened her throat. She looked around, but the cemetery was empty, silent as always. Her fingers rested on the drawing once more, tracing every crooked line, every innocent detail. It made no sense. Ethan had no children, not officially. And even if he did, why would someone bring a boy there? And why now? Claire spent the rest of the day in a trance, replaying the scene in her mind. She tried to convince herself it was a mistake. Someone mixed up the graves. A lonely visitor. A child with an overactive imagination. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that. This was no coincidence. That night, she didn't sleep. And by morning, Claire did something she hadn't done in years. She went back to the cemetery 2 days in a row. She needed to understand. She had to find out who that child was. Who the woman that brought him there was. And most of all, why when she looked at that small drawing. She felt the strange sensation of standing before a piece of Ethan. What she didn't know was that this visit would change everything. That a simple teddy bear left on a cold stone would reopen old wounds, and at the same time reveal long-buried truths. Because sometimes, life sends signs in the places we least expect. And when it comes to love, even the kind death tried to silence. No grave can hide what refuses to die. The next day, Claire arrived earlier. The sun had barely risen, and the fog blanketed the cemetery paths like a thick veil. Her heart pounded. Something inside told her she needed to be there, as if fate had scheduled a reunion. She hid behind a tree, keeping her eyes fixed on the curve of the main path. She waited silently, her hands trembling inside her coat pockets. Then she saw. A woman approached with calm steps, carrying a child wrapped in a blue blanket in her arms. The woman had simple features, wore a work uniform, and her hair was tied up carelessly, like someone who barely had time to look in the mirror. Claire recognized the logo on her chest. The diner across from the cemetery. That small, familiar place she had ignored so many times. The woman walked slowly to Ethan's grave, knelt down, and carefully placed the boy on the ground. The little boy, around 3 years old, had light brown curly hair. As soon as his feet touched the damp grass, he ran to the grave and hugged the teddy bear, which was still there from the day before. Claire held her breath. The boy looked at the headstone and with his big expressive eyes smiled. That smile. Claire felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. There was something familiar in that look, in the way he wrinkled his nose. It was like seeing Ethan, not as a man, but as a child. Like he was when he asked to sleep with the light on. like when he came home from school with drawings in his backpack and stories to tell. It was as if a distant echo had taken form right there, in front of her. The woman hugged him tightly, holding him against her chest, and began to cry. Not a loud cry, but a muffled, aching sob. Claire approached slowly, silently. Her heart screamed, but reason begged for caution. When she was just a few steps away, she spoke, her voice firm but gentle. "Was he your relative?" The woman turned around, startled, quickly wiping her face. She held the boy tightly and stood as if ready to run. "I'm sorry. You scared me," she said, hesitating. "Do you come here often?" Claire asked, now looking directly into the child's curious eyes. The woman hesitated for a moment, then simply replied, He was someone very important, that's all." Claire didn't press, but something inside her already knew. There was an invisible thread there, stitching past and present. The child looked at her again and, without warning, smiled. That same smile Ethan had when he'd done something wrong and came to apologize with a drawing in hand. It was impossible to deny. Claire didn't know the boy's name or the woman's, but in that moment, among the silence of the dead, she was sure of one thing. That boy carried something of Ethan within him, something that time, distance, or even death could never erase. Claire didn't sleep that night. The image of the kneeling woman, her teary eyes, the boy hugging the teddy bear so lovingly, it all spun in her mind like a broken record. Something inside her screamed for answers. For years, she had accepted silence as company, but now silence seemed to be hiding a secret, one that may have always been right in front of her, but pride or fear blinded her to it. The next morning, Claire didn't go back to the cemetery. Instead, she parked discreetly across the street in front of the small diner with dusty windows and a faded sign. The same name on the woman's uniform from the day before. She watched the comings and goings of the staff for a few minutes, and then she saw her. The same woman. Hair hurriedly tied, simple uniform, tired expression. Behind her, holding her hand tightly, was the boy, Milo. Claire still didn't know his name, but she already felt he was part of her in an unexplainable way. She waited until things quieted down and went in. The doorbell rang with a metallic sound, and a few heads turned. The scent of fresh coffee and buttery pancakes filled the air. Claire pretended to choose a table, but her focus was on her, Helena. The woman moved quickly between tables, serving plates, cleaning, smiling. And every so often, she glanced toward the back of the diner, where an older woman looked after Milo, who was busy with crayons and paper. Claire called the waiter, asked only for a coffee, and quietly observed. When Helena approached to serve the table next to hers, their eyes met for a second. It was brief, but intense. Recognition. Claire saw that she remembered too. The visit to the cemetery had not been forgotten. Hours later, when the diner had emptied out a bit, Claire got up and walked to the counter. The manager, a slow-speaking man with a cautious gaze, served her. Claire asked calmly, "The woman who works here, has she been here long?" "Helena," he replied carefully. "Since before the boy was born. She came here pregnant, quiet, hard-working, never caused trouble." Claire swallowed hard. She did the math in her head. 3 years, maybe a bit more. The timeline fit. Ethan had died shortly before that. The lump in her throat grew. "Is she from around here?" "I don't know much. She never talked about her life. Just that there was a man, someone she loved deeply, who left." Claire asked nothing more. She thanked him, walked out, and got into her car. Inside, she cried in silence. The truth was right in front of her. Helena wasn't a stranger. She was someone her son had loved. And that boy was the link between what was lost and what still remained. She didn't know what to do with that. She just knew that for the first time in years, she needed to understand, not to judge, but to try and fix what life had broken without asking. She stood up slowly, thanked in silence, and left. She needed to breathe. She needed to process. Because now everything had changed. She was a grandmother, even if no one called her that yet. Even if the pain was too big for words. The sky was overcast when Claire returned, days later. She wore no makeup, no high heels, none of the expensive clothes that used to intimidate. All she carried was the weight of regret on her shoulders, and in her empty hands, a sincere desire to start over. She approached the restaurant with hesitant steps, unsure if she would be welcomed. But she couldn't go on living with that emptiness, an absence that now had a name, a face, a voice, and a smile. Helena saw her through the window. For a moment she thought about not opening the door, but something about Claire's posture had changed. There was no arrogance anymore, only humanity. She took a deep breath and motioned for her to come in. "I'd like to talk, if you'll allow it," Claire said humbly. Helena gestured for her to follow her to the back again. There was no longer tension, only a curious silence between two women who, until recently, had lived in parallel worlds. They sat at the same table as before. Claire rested her elbows, looked around as if seeking courage in the worn-out walls of the place. "I was a strict mother, Helena. Cold, maybe. I wanted Ethan to be perfect, to have a life planned out, no mistakes, no risks. But that killed a part of him. And now that I've discovered everything, I realize it killed a part of me too." Helena listened silently. There was no judgment in her eyes, only listening. "I didn't come here to take anything from you, or from Milo. On the contrary, I just want to be present, if you'll let me. If he lets me. I want to tell him who his father was. I want to share with you the good parts of Ethan that you may never have known, and hear from you the parts I never saw." The words came out haltingly, but sincerely. Claire wasn't begging. She wasn't demanding. She was simply standing before the woman who raised her grandson and asking for something simple, yet immense. A chance. Helena lowered her eyes. Silence stretched. Then, in a quiet voice, she replied, "I don't want him to lose his essence, Claire. Milo is happy with the little he has. He doesn't know what a mansion is, or what an important surname means. He doesn't need that. And I'm afraid he'll get lost in that world, the one I never wanted for him." Claire nodded slowly. "Then we won't change anything. We'll just add to it. I'll come into his life in the way that's lightest for you, as someone who tells stories, who brings an extra hug. Nothing more, nothing less." Helena took a deep breath, still processing it all. But finally she said, "We can try." Slowly. Claire smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't full forgiveness. But it was a beginning. And in that beginning, there was room for everything. Grief, love, memory, and hope. Because sometimes, all it takes is a simple permission for life to bloom again, even among the ruins. Claire began showing up quietly. No announcements, no grand gestures, just presence. She brought a storybook under her arm, or a bag of corn muffins she said she'd learned to make when Ethan was little. She came with no promises and no expensive gifts. Only time. The time she'd withheld for so long out of fear and control, now offered in the form of attention and affection. At first, Milo watched her with the innocent curiosity of a child who doesn't yet understand the importance of certain presences. He stayed close to Helena, peeking from behind the restaurant furniture or from the porch of their small house. But slowly, he drew closer. First, he took the muffins. Then, he listened to the stories. Finally, he started waiting for her, watching the street, hoping to see her turn the corner. Claire, who never knew how to play with children, started to relearn. She sat on the floor, mimicked silly voices from the stories, pretended to be a sleepy dragon or a lost astronaut in the backyard. And Milo laughed, loudly, freely, just like Ethan used to laugh when he still believed the world fit inside a blanket fort in the living room. One day, he called her Aunt Claire. She froze, smiled. That was more than she could have asked for. But a few weeks later, on an ordinary afternoon, with the floor covered in crayons and paper, Milo looked at her with those brown eyes, so much like Ethan's, and suddenly said, "Grandma Claire, look at my drawing." She nearly fell apart right there. Her heart stopped and restarted in a single beat. That wasn't just a name. It was acceptance, a recognition without pressure. It was love, born effortlessly, without fear. It was the past making peace with the present. Helena watched everything closely, still wary at times, but her heart softened by what she saw. Claire wasn't there to take anything away, or to replace anyone. She was there to give, not to take. And that made all the difference. Milo started asking when she'd come back, begged her to read the same story 3 times in a row, wanted to show her every new scribble, every worm he found in the garden. And Claire always came, not out of obligation, but out of joy. She felt useful, alive, needed, not as a businesswoman, not as the strong woman Savannah knew, but as a grandmother, just a grandmother. Slowly, Sundays began to smell like cake and sound like laughter. And even though the world outside remained harsh, unfair, and full of loss, something rare began to bloom in that small, unlikely trio. A true bond, built with tenderness, patience, and redemption. Because sometimes the family life takes away. Life also gives back, in a different form, at a different time, but with the same love. Rain fell gently that gray afternoon, tapping softly on the roof of Helena's small house. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Claire and Helena sat at the kitchen table, each with a mug in hand, wrapped in a comfortable silence that only exists between people who have shared similar pain. Milo was asleep on the couch, hugging the teddy bear he insisted on taking everywhere. Claire looked down at her cup, then at Helena, and spoke, without rehearsals, without filters. "For a long time, I thought loving Ethan was my exclusive right, as if no one else could know him the way I did, as if a mother's love was the only valid kind." Helena didn't respond right away. She let the words settle in the air, echoing through the simple home where love showed up in small things. A folded blanket, a fixed toy, a warm plate of food. "But you loved him in a way I never could," Claire continued. "In a way that was light, free, without pressure, without demands. And he was happy with you. I saw it in the letter, in Milo's eyes, in every detail you quietly preserved without ever asking for anything." Helena watched her for a moment, then smiled gently. "He was afraid, not of me, but of the world you represented, of what was expected of him. He wanted to be himself, Claire, to love, to fail, to be a father, maybe stumble and try again. But he was afraid of disappointing you." Claire felt the tears come, but didn't hold them back. For the first time, she felt human, not untouchable, not unbreakable, just human. "I wish I had been different. More of a mother, less of a judge," she said, voice breaking. "You still can be," Helena replied. "Not with him, but with what he left behind, with Milo." In that quiet moment, there was no more resentment. Only 2 women who had loved the same man and now shared the same mission, to care for the piece of him that remained. Because love, when it's real, never dies. It transforms. And in that humble home, beneath the sound of the rain, forgiveness found a home. The sun rose shyly that Saturday, gently lighting up the small backyard behind Helena's house. Colorful balloons danced along the fences, and paper flags fluttered in the breeze, bringing simple joy to the place. There was no luxury, no extravagance, just a table with homemade cake, plastic cups, a few toys scattered on the grass, and in the center of it all, a barefoot 4-year-old boy laughing loudly like the world was simple and fair. It was Milo's birthday. Helena adjusted the treats on the table while Claire hung the last paper flags on a makeshift clothesline. Her shirt was slightly stained with frosting, and her smile was one she'd forgotten she could have. Nothing resembled the formal events she used to attend. No influential guests, no photographers, no expensive decorations. But it had something no previous party ever offered: belonging. Milo ran up to her with arms wide, his face lit up with pure joy. "Grandma Claire, look! I got a red toy car." She knelt down and hugged him tightly. It still felt strange to hear him call her that, but more and more, it felt natural. It felt right. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You deserve so much more." Claire looked around. Some neighbors and Helena's co-workers were there, bringing simple dishes, laughing, helping with the kids. Everything pulsed with a different rhythm. Slower, more real. And right there, among laughter, wobbly steps, and birthday candles that struggled to stay lit, she understood. Nothing needed to change. Milo didn't need mansions or a fancy last name. He needed this: affection, presence, truth. Later, after the party ended and Milo fell asleep in Helena's arms, his face smeared with chocolate, Claire gently stepped into his room. She looked around, crayon drawings on the walls. On the dresser, a makeshift frame with a photo of her, one of Helena, and the one she had brought that morning, Ethan as a child, smiling wide, his eyes now living in Milo's. She sat at the edge of the bed, watching her grandson sleep peacefully, teddy bear in his arms. A tear slid down her cheek, not of sadness, but gratitude. Before leaving, she placed the frame beside his bed. Now, Ethan and Milo were together, in memory, in blood, and in the love these two women had built with courage. Claire closed the door gently, and before walking away, gave the room one last look. She smiled and thought, "I can't change the past, but I can take care of what's left of it." And that's exactly what she did. Because when love defeats pride, what once was lost becomes legacy. And even in Savannah, where everything began with nameless grief, hope found a home. Did this emotional story move you too? Then go ahead and hit that like button to show you're with us on this journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our next heartwarming tales, and tap the bell icon so you're always in the loop. Now tell me, from which city or state are you watching us? I want to know where this amazing energy comes from that helps us spread so much love around here. Drop a comment. I'd love to chat with you. Thanks for staying with us, and get ready, because the next video is going to be just as powerful. See you soon.